This is the story of the perfect supercar that failed to dethrone the king, the Honda NSX, or as you may know it, the Acura NSX. It was Honda's first attempt at a true supercar that could rival the European giants of Ferrari and Lamborghini. What they produced would change the world of supercars. A car signed off by one of motorsport's most beloved sons, and was the inspiration for the greatest supercar the world has seen. So how did this tiny, practical, hatchback-making automaker break supercar design as we know it, and why does some regard it as a failure? To explore the NSX story, we need to head back to the early 1980s. For those unaware of the brand, Honda has been around for a long time. Founded in 1946 by Soichiro Honda from the ruins of his former business, they started by making scooters. Honda would become the biggest name on two wheels a few years later. By 1963, Honda would go from their first four-wheeler to Formula One engine providers in less than 12 months, beginning a relationship with racing that would continue for decades. Despite this success, Honda was not a high-performance car maker. They had the reliable steed, the trusted transport for the sensible person. It was a sensible approach that made Honda's cars a success. Their front-engine, front-wheel drive cars, a setup known as FF. This setup gave great handling with safety and ease of construction, which meant affordable construction. This was great when you wanted to build a Civic or an Integra, but it doesn't lend itself well to the highest levels of performance, the levels needed to break into the realm of supercars. Honda was looking for a new layout, a way to shift from the FFs of old into the Honda of new. Their proposed design was called the UMR, underfloor, midship engine, rear-wheel drive. This layout, made famous by the Lamborghini Miura, would allow Honda to explore a sportier line of vehicles, but it was a seismic shift that would come with its own obstacles. Honda had experience with high-performance engines. After all, they made Formula One engines since 1964. Honda knew how to make a supercar-worthy engine, but it knew less about the rest of the supercar package. It would come as no shock then to hear the first testbed for the UMR layout was the Honda City. I know, this tiny boxcar would serve as a proving ground for the concept that would become the NSX. These tests would amaze the engineers involved in its development. Despite looking odd on paper, the mid-engine rear-drive City had handling qualities unlike any other Honda product. It created a new, dynamic and engaging Honda, unlike anything before it. But there was one big issue. Honda at the time did not possess the skills or technology to bring something like this to life. This means only one thing in the automotive world. So the NSX had to be shelved. But it wouldn't stay that way for long. 1983 would see Honda return to the world of Formula One. And just like their mid-engine Honda City experiment, their return to Formula One would change everything. This period saw Honda dominate Grand Prix racing. Between 1986 and 1991, they won 5 consecutive Drivers' Championships with Nelson Piquet, Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, and 6 Constructors' titles with Williams and McLaren. Honda was back in the performance conversation, and like a friend that refuses to leave the group chat, Honda was here to stay. This return to performance racing would coincide with the launch of the Acura brand. The Acura brand was a way for Honda, the small, cheap, boring car maker, to sell high-end luxury vehicles like the great German brands. Honda and Acura was the first of the Japanese brands to use this approach, to market luxury cars to the American market. And the first car, the Legend, would go on to smash the Germans in every showroom across America. It even prompted Toyota and Nissan to release their own luxury brands, with Lexus and Infiniti following not long after. Honda had conquered yet another new field in record time, but to make a lasting impact, they needed a halo car. So what do? You've conquered Japan, Formula One, and America by beating the Germans at their own game. So what's left to accomplish? Well, let's take another look at that funky, rear-wheel drive Honda City and go after the one market we haven't dominated: supercars. Just imagine being an Italian engineer in the 1980s. You're sat at your station at Ferrari or Lamborghini, looking at the other guy's car, trying to find a way to make your next design more bonkers than the last. At no point are you expecting the nerdy Japanese and their boring poor man cars to come a knocking. Honda laid down the gauntlet. Like the white wizard they proclaimed, build me a car worthy of Ferrari. The benchmark was the 328, a 3.2-litre V8 supercar with 266 horsepower. But unlike the Ferrari 328, Honda had a side mission for its supercar. It had to be reliable, practical, safe, and daily drivable. In other words, it had to be like no supercar before it. And just as an added challenge, the car needed to weigh no less than 3,000 pounds, safety features and all. Just like the fragile Ferrari benchmark. To make this dream a reality, Honda would benchmark their competition. Countless cars were tested until they had every last piece of data laid out on what would become known as the Milky Way diagram. On the y-axis, those good old power to weight, and on the x-axis, wheelbase to weight, or in other words, how good it turned and stopped. At the far end of the diagram was the Honda City and every other Honda they had ever made, and on the far left, Formula 1. Yes, Honda baselined a Formula 1 car because the NSX needed to break the mold of its rivals and bring the average driver as close to the action as possible, whilst keeping them facing the right direction and not on fire. The NSX was here, far closer to the driving style of a Formula 1 car than any supercar on sale. To do this, they needed to take Formula 1 tech and dilute it down to something the average man could drink. This was no easy task. After all, if it was, why had nobody done it? Struggling to find a way to keep weight down to hit the 3,000-pound ceiling whilst maintaining strength in that all-important body shell, Honda engineers would find inspiration not in America or Italy, but in their own backyard. The Shinkansen. You might know it as the bullet train, or for a long time, the fastest train in the world. The Shinkansen uses an aluminium frame. Why? Well, because it was light but strong, allowing the trains to reach 200 miles an hour plus without an issue. An added bonus for Honda was that this material was not alien to them. Back in Formula 1, the geniuses at Lotus had used an all-aluminium monocoque for their Lotus 25, a car piloted by Jim Clark back in 1963 to Formula 1 glory. The Lotus 25 was running around in 1964, right when the Honda R&D company entered their first engine into the sport. Like the Lotus, the use of an all-aluminium monocoque, the first for a production car, shaved 441 pounds off the NSX's waistline without compromising its strength. The Honda had been to the gym and it was lean and buff, so Honda ticked off the body. Next, they needed to work out how to propel this frame to supercar stardom. To do this, they would delve into their parts bin and take something from their Integra sports car and something else from a far less sporty car you would never expect. The prototype NSX, called the HP-X or Honda Pininfarina Experimental, yes, the same Pininfarina that designed Ferraris, was a wedge-shaped concept car that debuted at the 1984 Turin Auto Show. It was a concept car that featured a 2-litre V6 from, you guessed it, the Acura Legend, a boring sedan. It wasn't the same as a US spec Legend. It was a Japan-only engine, but this prototype served as the basis for what would become the NS-X, or New Sports Car X. The midship rear-drive layout from that City Mule and lightweight materials would form the building blocks for the new NSX. There was just one problem: that engine. It was a single overhead cam 2-litre that had no right being anywhere near this project. So during its development, the team tried the US 2.7 and later the 3-litre V6. But all of these engines were missing one huge piece of tech, a piece of tech that would define the brand until today. This would all change on February 9, 1989 in Chicago, Illinois, at the Drake Hotel, 4 miles from the Chicago Auto Show. Several car companies showcased their latest offerings. The Acura stage was all set. The NS-X, as it was known at this point, was on the stage under a cover. Journalists had started to pour in. Many would find the first showing of Mazda's little roadster, the Miata. Few would head towards the Acura stand, unaware of what lay underneath the sheet. Honda president Tadashi Kume wanted one last look at his creation before the cameras arrived. He took off the cover to inspect the paintwork, he checked the panel gaps and tested the fittings. Then he hopped inside. The Acura marketing team, unaware of what the president was doing, were about to descend into a panic. Kume fired up his new beast. His marketing team rushed over to stop him. Just next door, the Ford Motor Company was having a press conference. They pleaded with Kume to stop. Turn off the car, they begged. But Kume pinned the throttle. By the time the Ford conference had finished, every journalist in the building knew that Acura had something special hidden under cover. But Kume was less than impressed. Kume would turn his attention to the engine. As mentioned before, the engineers had opted for a regular engine, a single overhead cam V6 from one of their comfy sedans. At the same time, Honda had been developing something game-changing, something they planned to unveil in their latest Integra, a little innovation known as VTEC. VTEC, a type of electronically controlled valve timing, is a fancy system for controlling the engine's valves, the parts that allow a mixture of fuel and air to ignite. If you can hold the valves open for longer, you can get in more air and fuel, making more power. The downside? The car would become less economical. That is, of course, unless you could switch between the two. Step forward, VTEC. Kumei's influence would lead engineers to a last-minute change. The car was due to launch. Now was not the time to head back to the drawing board, but they did. They made a new block. Titanium connecting rods were added to allow the engine to rev higher, a first for a production car, alongside a larger head to contain the VTEC system, and a new intake called VVIS. As with all VTEC engines, the red line increased to 8,000 RPM. There was just one rather tight issue. This new engine was too big to fit in the engine bay. So they did what Honda do best. They found a solution. They took the engine, and setting a trend followed by every Civic owner since, they dropped its seat back and tilted it 5 degrees. A small change, but one that enabled this new engine to fit in the finalized body. It worked so well that they never looked at it again. It would continue to be made that way until the final NSX rolled off the production line. So Honda had it done. The body was finished. The engine was finished. All they needed to do now was make it look pretty, just like the HPX concept, and bam, the world would be blown away, and Acura, and by extension Honda, would be the new kings. To match the space-age frame and modern engine, Honda would turn to the skies for inspiration. Here, streaking through the clouds at 40,000 feet, was the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon, the very latest in fighter plane design. And no, Honda was not going to equip the NSX with Sidewinder rockets. It was, however, going to take inspiration from its cockpit, or to be more correct, its canopy. They gave the NSX a huge greenhouse with no C-pillars, meaning unparalleled vision for those inside, a must-have for Honda's mission to create an everyday usable supercar. They stole some cues from its cab-forward layout as well, allowing for the long-tail design that enhanced high-speed stability. The stage was set. All they needed to do now was test this collection of cutting-edge technology and make it feel like the car it was destined to be. To do this, they would turn to the one man on the planet who could do things nobody else could. The NSX was at Suzuka for its month-long testing trials prior to release. Whether by look or design, so was a Brazilian guy who knew a thing or two about driving, some guy called Ayrton Senna.
Here we have Ayrton Senna, probably the greatest racing driver of all time.
Ayrton Senna was the man. He was Formula One's golden boy, a driver who could do things nobody else could, a driver who could drive flat out in any car and any conditions. If there was a cheat code for Formula One, it would be spelled like this. So of course, with Senna in Japan and driving a Honda-powered McLaren in testing, it seemed the logical step to letting the Brazilian get behind the wheel of the NSX. Senna wasn't sure he could help with the production car, but he jumped in and gave it a few laps around the track. Honda engineers sat back and watched with big smiles, knowing Senna's stamp of approval would give them all a huge pat on the back. As Senna pulled in and got out of the car, everyone was on edge. Then the Brazilian uttered a devastating line. "It's a bit fragile." This was a death blow for the engineers. How, after all of this testing, could he have come to this conclusion? But when Senna speaks, you must listen. And because of that now famous line, Honda engineers needed to get back to work. They took the car back to its shell, fired up their supercomputers, whipped out their tissues and lotion, and prepared to get stiff.
Wang! Pay attention.
I was distracted by that enormous flying...
They took the car to the Nürburgring. They got to work hammering the NSX. Every time they found a slight flaw, they would weld in reinforcement, one piece at a time, over and over again. The outcome would be a car 50% stiffer than the one that came before it. It was 40% lighter than a Porsche 911, whilst being 50% stronger than the German sports cars. 6 years and $140 million later, Honda would have their new car, and the factories required to build something nobody had built before. Journalists loved it. It won every award possible, and had a waiting list of over 2 years. Why? Well, it was fast, reliable, easy to handle, and yet it could push the boundaries of what you thought possible. It hit the brief to a T. It was everything a Ferrari could be, but wasn't. It even beat the Ferrari 328 successor, the 348, in both 0 to 60 and quarter-mile tests. And the impressive achievements didn't end there. The NSX dominated on track. Using the JGTC and Super GT between 1997 and 2009, it was one of the most successful cars in history. It won 36 races, 45 pole positions, 3 teams and 2 Drivers' Championships, and finished runner-up in the Drivers' Championship 6 times when it didn't win it. The NSX holds the record for the most consecutive victories in the series. It was immovable 10 years after its launch. So this brings us back to the last sentence of the first paragraph of this video. Why is it considered a failure? The answer is complicated, yet fairly obvious when you think about it. Take a second and think about what makes a perfect daily driver. It needs to be reliable, right? Cost effective, comfortable, easy to maintain. If you write that down, you could say the NSX can tick off all of those boxes, even though it's a supercar. But if you look at the same list for a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, it wouldn't tick a single one, and that's why people bought them. The NSX was perfect. On paper, it was the ultimate supercar, but supercars aren't about what the numbers say, they're about emotions. You don't buy a Ferrari to have the fastest car. You buy a Ferrari because you can, because you have wealth and power. You don't need a reliable, safe, boring car. You need a symbol, the automotive equivalent of getting your reproductive organs out and doing a little dance. The NSX flew out of the gate when it hit the sales floor, but once the shine of something new wore off and dealers had marked them up to the same price as a Ferrari, the draw disappeared. Why spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on the perfect supercar when you could spend the same on something silly and unnecessary? Things don't need to be perfect, and the NSX is a perfect example. We can thank the NSX for being the inspiration to this car that we covered right here, the infamous Gordon Murray crafted McLaren F1. Go check that video out.